The drought had begun like a whisper, a slow theft of moisture, so subtle that few noticed until it was already too late. By midsummer, the lake had shrunk by 20 feet, its shoreline curling inward like a wound tightening around itself. The air carried the smell of baked clay and forgotten algae. Fish bones and bottle caps glittered on the exposed ground, relics of careless summers when water still had the strength to forgive. Then someone found it, a shape half buried in the cracked mud. At first, they thought it was a fallen dock or a forgotten boat. But when the sun angled just right, the light caught on something too deliberate to be driftwood, a curve of riveted metal, dull by time but unmistakably human in its creation. Children ran home to fetch their parents. By the next morning, a small crowd had gathered, whispering around the relic as if afraid their voices might wake whatever slept inside it. It was a tale of an aircraft. The letters still faintly visible on its flank spelled out part of a registration, number the older locals recognized. It matched a plane listed as missing since 1953, a Douglas Skitran that had vanished over the valley during a routine supply run, swallowed by fog and rumor. For decades, people had told stories about it. Lights in the sky, ghostly engines heard on windless nights, a pilot who kept flying long after his heart stopped. Most dismissed it as local legend. Now, the legend had a body. News spread quickly. The county sheriff cordoned off the area with yellow tape that fluttered weakly in the heat. Journalists arrived in dust-covered SUVs, setting up tripods that sank slowly into softening mud. They filmed the wreck from every angle, speaking in practiced tones about the mystery beneath the drought. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the strange unease that spread through those who stood too close for too long. The air around the wreck seemed denser somehow, carrying a low vibration like the hum of distant machinery. On the third day, a team from the State Historical Society came to begin excavation. They brought brushes, shovels, and drones. As they dug, more of the fuselage emerged, a silver serpent coiled under decades of sediment. The windows were opaque with silt, the metal warped by time. Yet beneath the decay, something gleamed too sharply, too cleanly. One of the workers, a man named Harris, noticed movement below the surface. Not in the water, which had gone still, but in the mud itself. He swore he saw a ripple, as though something metallic was shifting beneath, responding to the intrusion. That night, Harris didn't return to the motel. They found his tools beside the wreck, his boots sunk deep into the mire as if he'd stepped out of them. The mud had hardened around the soles, preserving them in place. His co-workers assumed he'd gone for a drink or maybe driven home in frustration. But when dawn came, his truck remained in the same spot, keys still dangling from the ignition. The sheriff ordered the site closed until further notice, but curiosity has a way of seeping through fences. Teenagers came after dark with flashlights and phones, daring each other to touch the tail. They posted videos online of the way the metal seemed to hum when struck, a resonance that didn't echo but absorbed, as if the sound went inward instead of outward. In some clips, you could hear faint voices overlapping, impossible to decipher yet disturbingly human. An elderly man named Crawford, who had been a boy when the plane disappeared, claimed he remembered the night it went missing. He said he'd seen lights over the ridge, not the white of aircraft beacons, but a shimmering blue, like lightning trapped under glass. He'd told his father then, but no one believed him. Now, standing before the exposed ruin, he touched the corroded surface and whispered, "I told you it wasn't the sky that took them." In the following days, the excavation resumed under stricter control. The archaeologists unearthed fragments of equipment, a radio headset, a twisted oxygen tank, the corner of a logbook sealed in what looked like melted aluminum. Each artifact they pulled out was strangely warm, even under the pale sun. When one of the researchers placed a magnet near the fuselage, the needle spun erratically as though confused by too many poles. The most unsettling discovery came a week later. Beneath the cockpit frame, entombed in sediment, was what appeared to be a human silhouette, perfectly preserved, suspended mid-motion. The form was encased in a thin metallic film that shimmered faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. When the team tried to take readings, every electronic device malfunctioned. Cameras froze, microphones hissed, and even wristwatches stopped ticking. The lead scientist, Dr. Ellis, decided to halt operations until further analysis could be done. That night, she dreamed of water rising in reverse, flowing upward into the sky. In the reflection, she saw faces looking back from beneath the surface, their eyes glowing faintly as if lit from within. When she awoke, her hands smelled faintly of ozone and rust. By the time federal agents arrived, the locals had already started avoiding the lake. Livestock refused to drink from it. The air held a metallic tang that made tongues feel coated. Those who lived nearest complained of hearing engines at dawn, though the sky remained empty. And sometimes when the wind shifted, the lake gave off a faint hum that vibrated through bone and memory alike. The official report labeled the incident a recovery of historical remains complicated by magnetic interference. The area was fenced off and declared unstable. But those who had seen the shimmer beneath the mud knew something else had been uncovered, or perhaps awakened. Because even now, on the driest days, when the sun bakes the shore into a mirror of cracked clay, a faint metallic glimmer still moves beneath the surface. And though the water is still, the glimmer moves as if breathing. Within 48 hours of the first official announcement, the entire perimeter of the lake was wrapped in barbed wire and warning signs. The United States Air Force moved in with an efficiency that seemed rehearsed, as though this had always been part of the plan. Soldiers in clean uniforms patrolled the cracked shoreline, their reflections quivering in the shallow pools that remained. Heavy trucks rolled across the dry bed, kicking up clouds of white dust that settled like ash on the reeds. Locals gathered at the ridge to watch, their questions met with rehearsed phrases: environmental hazard, toxic sediment, public safety concern. No one bought the explanation, but the tone of the men in uniform made it clear that belief wasn't required. A thick green tarp was stretched over the exposed fuselage, and a temporary hangar was erected around it within days. The hum that had unsettled the town for weeks was replaced by the sound of generators, floodlights, and the low murmur of radio chatter. At night, the once quiet valley pulsed with artificial light, as if the stars had been brought down and forced into service. Then came the divers. They arrived discreetly in unmarked vans, their logos covered with black tape, their names erased from any public roster. The local sheriff, once in charge of the site, now stood outside the fence like everyone else. Through binoculars, the townsfolk caught glimpses of figures in wetsuits descending into the remaining water, disappearing beneath a sheen that shimmered faintly even under floodlight. The dive team had been contracted under strict non-disclosure agreements. No phones, no personal cameras, no external contact. Each member was required to surrender electronic devices before entering the site. Even their equipment had been modified by the Air Force engineers. Military-grade sonar, oxygen tanks with encrypted regulators, communication channels that looped directly to an unmarked trailer near the command tent. Among them was Dr. Adrian Cole, a marine archaeologist whose reputation had been built on uncovering shipwrecks lost to forgotten wars. Cole had seen enough sunken history to know when something didn't fit the map. He'd been called in under the pretense of analyzing historical debris, but the language of the briefing was wrong. Too cautious, too evasive. They spoke of unknown alloys, self-sustaining resonance, and thermal anomalies. That wasn't the vocabulary of contamination. It was a language of discovery or containment. At his side worked Nadia Voss, a sonar technician who had spent years mapping the floor of the Baltic Sea. She was sharp, methodical, and famously unshakable, yet even she hesitated when she saw the lake for the first time. From the ridge, the surface looked unnatural, too still, too uniform, reflecting light in narrow bands that shimmered like metal under skin. She noted that her handheld sonar pinged faintly even before calibration, detecting echoes where no water should have been deep enough to return them. Before the first ascent, a colonel in dark sunglasses addressed the team. You are to recover what is accessible and report any anomalies immediately. You will not analyze on-site. All findings belong to the Department of Defense. His voice was steady, stripped of emotion, the kind of voice trained to carry command without revealing thought. When Cole asked whether they should expect hazardous materials, the colonel replied only, "You'll know if you find one." The first dive began at dawn. The lake's reduced level had left the water murky and brown, dense with silt that clung to the divers' gloves and masks. Visibility was nearly zero beyond 2 feet. Through the haze, the silhouette of the aircraft appeared, ghostly, elongated by refraction. Cole felt a familiar weight of pressure against his chest as he descended along the guide rope. His earpiece crackled with Nadia's voice. Depth 12 meters. Sonar interference increasing. No known signal match. She was right. The sonar display inside her tent bloomed with patterns that didn't belong. Not reflections, not noise, but organized pulses that repeated at irregular intervals, almost like a heartbeat trying to sync with the equipment. The waves emanated from below the plane, not within it. When she adjusted the frequency, the pulses shifted to match, as though the source were listening and responding. Cole's gloved hand brushed against the fuselage. The metal was warm, not with the store heat of the sun, but with something internal, steady, like blood through veins. He felt a faint vibration run up his arm. His dive gauge flickered, readings jumping between 0 and impossible. For a moment, his vision blurred, and he could swear the rivets along the tail section rippled, softening and reforming like mercury. When he resurfaced, gasping through his regulator, the air above the lake tasted metallic. The colonel was waiting at the platform. Cole tried to describe what he'd seen, but the officer raised a hand before he could finish. "You'll record that in your report, Doctor," he said. "For now, you'll rest. Debrief at 1800. Nadia stayed behind in the tent, replaying the sonar feed. The patterns persisted even after Cole had resurfaced, as if the lake itself had learned to echo. She increased the gain until the interference became a rhythm. Beneath the static, she thought she heard something like breath. She muted the channel, heart hammering. The sound stopped. When she unmuted, it resumed, perfectly synchronized with her own breathing. By the second day, 2 of the divers refused to go back in. They said the water was moving against them, pulling toward the center like a slow heartbeat. Their words were dismissed as fatigue. But that night, one of the Air Force technicians monitoring thermal sensors reported sudden spikes, shapes forming and fading just below the surface, colder than their surroundings, moving as if in deliberate formation. The colonel ordered all lights off for an hour to reduce electromagnetic reflection. In the dark, the lake began to glow faintly, pale silver beneath the moonless sky. From the ridge, the locals watched in silence. They had seen the military come and go before, but never like this. Never with floodlights that dimmed at once, never with soldiers who looked afraid to look at the water. Some swore they heard voices carried on the wind, metallic and distant, calling names that hadn't been spoken since 1953. Inside her tent, Nadia Voss rewound the sonar tape again and again. The pulse repeated steadily, neither random nor mechanical. It was a pattern, intricate, layered, a code, perhaps, or a memory. And somewhere deep beneath the mud, something metallic moved in rhythm with it, even though the water above remained perfectly, unnaturally still. When the divers went down again on the 4th morning, the air was cool and heavy, the kind of stillness that seems to warn before it speaks. The sun hovered pale above the valley, its light filtered through thin clouds of dust raised by the trucks along the shore. The water, reduced to a shallow expanse of dull bronze, looked less like a lake and more like a wound that refused to close. Dr. Adrian Cole led the descent this time, his body already trained to move in slow, deliberate motions through silt that behaved like smoke. The guide rope trembled faintly in his gloved hand. Below, his flashlight cut through murk and beams that seemed to bend. The water itself appeared thicker than it should have been, distorting light into strange, living shapes. The others followed, their bubbles rising sluggishly, vanishing long before reaching the surface. They reached the fuselage after 6 minutes. What they saw made them forget the years of rust and ruin they'd prepared for. The aircraft lay perfectly preserved, half buried in the silt but untouched by time. The aluminum skin gleamed beneath their lamps, smooth and unmarred by corrosion. There was no algae, no sediment clinging to the metal, no trace of decay or life. The propellers were frozen mid-turn, blades immaculate, as if the plane had settled there just hours before. Cole reached out and brushed a hand along the hull. The metal was cold, but dry, impossibly dry beneath 30 feet of water. He pressed harder, expecting grime, but his fingers left no mark. The sensation was disorienting. It was like touching something that didn't entirely exist in this world. Nadia's voice came through the comms, soft but unsteady. "Adrian, I'm getting interference again. The sonar's looping. The signal is not bouncing. It's answering." He didn't reply. He was staring at the tail number, cleanly visible without rust or fading. The paint was whole. The numbers gleamed like they had been freshly stenciled. The same aircraft listed as missing in 1953, now gleaming as though it had never flown a day in its life. The team circled the fuselage, careful to document everything. Their helmet cameras flickered intermittently, the footage stuttering as if reality itself resisted being recorded. Every few seconds, a burst of static filled the earpieces. But beneath the noise, there was a faint rhythmic pulse, slow and steady. Cole signaled for the hatch to be opened. The handle turned easily under his hand, and when the door gave way, no air escape, no pressure difference, no sound. The interior was dry, utterly dry. Dust motes floated lazily inside, defying the surrounding depth. He and two others entered cautiously. Their boots made no splash, only the dull scrape of soles against metal. The seats inside were upright, arranged neatly as though passengers might return at any moment. Seat belts hung loose, untarnished. The overhead compartments were closed. There was no algae, no mildew, no decay. Only stillness, perfect, deliberate stillness. Every seat was empty, every single one, except the cockpit. When Cole reached the front, his breath caught. There, slumped in the pilot's chair, was a skeleton, fully articulated, clothed in what remained of a military flight uniform. The bones were bleached pristine as though cleaned by unseen hands. And in its grasp, tight, almost possessive, was a black box, not shattered, not corroded, intact, and ticking. Faint but audible, the sound pulsed through the water, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat echoing in the comms. Tick, tick, tick. Cole leaned closer. The instrument lights inside the cockpit glowed faintly, soft amber bleeding through layers of dust that should not have existed underwater. The dials quivered. The needles moved, oscillating between impossible readings. He thought he saw movement outside the windshield, faint ripples in the mud, rising like breath beneath the floor. "Base, this is Cole," he said into the mic. "We have located the cockpit. One occupant. Skeletal remains. Black box recovered. It's functioning." Static answered him. "Base, repeat, do you copy?" The voice that came through wasn't the colonel's. It wasn't anyone from the surface. It was a male voice, calm, distant, recorded, yet somehow alive. "Do not disturb the vessel," it said. "It remembers." Cole froze. "Say again," the voice repeated, faint, warping through distortion. "It remembers." Nadia's voice broke through the channel, trembling now. "Adrian, get out. The sonars. Oh my God. It's not mapping the lake anymore. It's mapping us." Cole turned, his light sweeping over the cabin. For an instant, he could have sworn there were shapes in the seats, translucent figures, just out of sight, the air bending around where bodies might have been. The light flickered, and they were gone. He looked back to the pilot's skeleton. The skull was tilted slightly toward him now. He was sure it hadn't been before. The ticking grew louder, irregular, almost anxious. He reached for the black box, intending to secure it in a seal case. The instant his glove touched it, the sound stopped. Complete silence filled his headset. The pressure around him changed. His ears popped painfully. And then, without warning, every light, his Nadia's, the submersibles, went out at once. For a few seconds, there was only blackness and the thundering of his own heart. Then came the glow, a soft, golden luminescence rising from the fuselage itself, spreading through the metal like veins awakening. The hull shimmered, alive, humming with energy that vibrated through the water and into his bones. Nadia, still above, saw it on her screens. The entire wreck lighting up from within, sonar waves collapsing into a single point before vanishing altogether. The pulse she'd been tracking shifted frequency, from mechanical to organic, from code to rhythm. It began to match her heartbeat. Cole's voice crackled faintly through the radio. "It's not dead," he whispered. "It's remembering." Then the transmission cut off. On the surface, the water stilled once more. The Air Force men rushed to the edge, scanning for bubbles, for any sign of movement. There were none, only a faint shimmer beneath the mud, metallic, slow, deliberate, as if something deep below was breathing again after a long, long sleep. The black box was taken from the lake under heavy guard, sealed inside a triple-layer containment case, and transported in silence through the pre-dawn mist. No one spoke during the drive, not the colonel, not the technicians, not even Nadia Voss, who sat in the back seat staring at her hands, as if afraid they might start glowing too. The hum had followed them out of the water. She could still feel it under her ribs, a low pulse that matched no sound but refused to stop. They brought the recorder to a temporary lab, set up in the hangar beside the drained shore. Floodlights cast sterile light over tables filled with disassembled gear. The air smelled of ozone, diesel, and unease. The black box, an older model from the 1950s, its casing pristine despite decades underwater, was placed gently on the metal table. No corrosion, no scratches. The serial numbers were crisp, the bolts gleaming as though manufactured yesterday. Cole, pale and exhausted but alive, stood nearby, wrapped in a thermal blanket. He hadn't spoken much since resurfacing. His dive camera contained nothing but a blur of gold light before it cut to static. He kept glancing toward the lake, as though expecting the water to move again. The colonel gestured to the technicians. "Proceed." The lead technician pried open the recorder's casing with careful precision. Inside, the tape reels looked brand new, the ribbon taut and glossy. As the box opened fully, a faint crackle filled the air, static, whispering like wind through dry grass. Every device in the room, watches, monitors, even phones that were supposed to be off, flickered in unison. The sound grew clearer, a pattern of distortion punctuated by breath. "Play it," the colonel ordered. The technician threaded the tape into a modern reader. The machine clicked, hissed, and then began to spin. At first, there was only noise, a rolling sea of static, the sound of wind pressed through a tunnel. Then, faintly beneath it, a voice, male, strained but controlled. The words came slow, measured, as if fighting interference not from radio, but from reality itself. Altitude rising. No horizon. Reverse flight confirmed. Everyone froze. The technician adjusted the gain. The tape popped, rewound half a second, then played again, louder this time, more insistent. Altitude rising. No horizon. Reverse flight confirmed. The sentence looped, cycling endlessly as though the tape had no beginning or end. Each repetition layered over the last, the tone shifting subtly, fear creeping in, breath quickening, the static thickening like a storm closing in. Cole took a step forward. "That's Captain Marin's voice," he said quietly, "the pilot from the manifest. I've heard recordings from his earlier flights. That's him." The colonel didn't move. How would that be possible after 70 years underwater? The technician swallowed hard. "Sir, it's not even water damage. The magnetic field's too strong. This thing's been recording." The tape continued. Altitude rising. No horizon. Reverse flight confirmed. Reverse confirmed. Then a pause. A click. A sound like breathing through a broken mask. And another voice, faint, female, whispering under the distortion. Cole leaned in. "Play that again." They did. The second voice was clearer now, closer to the microphone. It wasn't the pilot. It wasn't anyone they could identify. The whisper cut through the static with a clarity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. "You're still inside it," it said. The lights dimmed. One of the monitors shorted out with a snap. The tape slowed, then sped up, as though the machine were being controlled by something unseen. On the waveform display, the static wasn't random anymore. It formed peaks, valleys, symmetrical shapes, patterns like pulse signatures. Nadia's breath quickened. "It's not playback," she said. "It's transmitting." The colonel shot her a look. "From where?" She pointed toward the lake through the open hangar door. "From there. From beneath." As if an answer, a tremor rippled through the ground. The lights swung on their cables. Outside, the drain lake shimmered under thin dawn, the surface quivering, reflecting the sky in impossible symmetry. For a moment, it looked like the water was reflecting anything at all, but revealing something behind it. A depth without bottom, a mirror that opened outward instead of down. The tape kept running. Altitude rising. No horizon. Reverse flight confirmed. But now the voice was joined by another, multiple, layered, male and female, human and not. A chorus of whispers folding into one another, rising and falling like breathing. Between the loops, fragments emerged. Engine light inside out, hold position impossible. We are above below. The technician tried to stop the machine. The button jammed. The reel spun faster. The room filled with static so dense it became a vibration, rattling the metal tables, making teeth ache. Cole grabbed the casing, trying to unplug the power, but his hand recoiled. The box was ice cold, yet a faint pulse throbbed inside it, steady as a heartbeat. He stared, realizing with dawning horror that it was keeping time with them. Altitude rising. It repeated, now quieter, softer, almost tender. No horizon. Then, just before the machine burned out, the final line came through, warped, distant, almost like prayer. Reverse flight complete. Arrival confirmed. Silence. The tape snapped. The hum in the hangar ceased. Every instrument, every light, every monitor went dark at once. Outside, in the gray light of morning, the lake's surface was still again. But for the first time since the drought began, the reflection showed a sky that wasn't theirs. That night, the valley held its breath. The wind died first, a hush so complete it made every other sound seem intrusive. Crickets went silent. The leaves stopped whispering. Even the generators by the hangar sputtered and stalled. Those who remained near the perimeter noticed the air grow heavier, charged, like the moment before a storm that never quite arrives. At first, no one paid attention to the water. It had been dull for weeks, a colorless smear at the bottom of a drain bowl. But around midnight, one of the soldiers on night watch radioed in, "Sir, the surface just leveled out." They thought he meant the water had stilled, but when the colonel and a handful of technicians came to look, they saw what he meant. The lake wasn't just still, it was flat. Too flat, like glass manufactured by intention. Even the faint ripples from their boots on the shore refused to spread, each impact vanishing instantly, as though absorbed. The moonlight hit the surface and spread in strange geometry, not reflection, but replication. The light didn't bounce. It continued, downwards through the water, illuminating something that looked like sky. Then came the stars. Not their stars. Points of light began to appear beneath the surface, sharp and clean, arranged in unfamiliar constellations. Some shimmered in clusters, others drifted like embers caught in invisible currents. They were brighter than the stars overhead, clearer, as if seen through the lens of another atmosphere entirely. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm, as though signaling from below. The soldiers stood speechless, their faces lit from beneath, the glow painting them in inverted night. The colonel muttered a prayer, without realizing it. Nadia stepped forward, her boots sinking into the damp mud, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. She couldn't look away. "It's not reflection," she whispered. "It's transmission." Cameras were raised, phones, DSLR, night vision rigs, but none of them worked. The lenses fogged instantly. Screens froze, shutters refused to open. Those who insisted on trying to film saw only static or blackness. Yet to the naked eye, the vision remained vivid, alive. The stars beneath shimmered, as though aware of being seen. Cole, still pale from the dive days earlier, approached slowly. "They're not under the lake," he said quietly. "They are the lake." He knelt at the edge, staring into what looked like infinite sky trapped under glass. His reflection was faint, erased by the light. There was no horizon down there, only distance without direction. The constellations shifted, realigned, forming patterns he almost recognized. Loops, spirals, arrangements that matched the sonar readings from the earlier dives. "Altitude rising," he murmured, remembering the recording. "No horizon." Nadia crouched beside him. "What if the plane didn't crash?" she said softly. "What if it just kept going? Somewhere else? What if the lake isn't a grave, but the doorway?" Her words hung in the air like condensation, and the colonel, standing behind them, snapped, "Step away. Both of you." But even he didn't move closer. His flashlight trembled slightly in his grip, the beam dying before it touched the surface, swallowed by a kind of darkness that wasn't absence of light, but something deeper, a refusal of it. Then, from the far side of the lake, a ripple appeared. Not a wave, a distortion, a perfect circular depression spreading outward but leaving the surface unbroken. The stars beneath shifted, bending around the center, as though orbiting an unseen mass. A low hum rolled through the ground, barely audible, but felt in the bones. The soldiers instinctively backed away. Equipment vibrated, radios hissed, and a few meters from the shore, a perfect sphere of light rose within the water, suspended, pulsing gently. It wasn't white or yellow, but a kind of impossible hue that changed depending on how one looked at it. Gold to some, violet to others, to a few, no color at all, only a sensation. The air tingled with static, and a faint smell of rain filled the dryness. Cole whispered, "That's where the cockpit was." As they watched, the sphere began to expand, unfolding like breath, until the stars beneath the lake seemed to rearrange themselves around it. Every few seconds, one of them would blink out above, as though traded, one for one. Nadia felt something warm on her cheek. She touched it, water, but when she looked up, the sky was clear. She looked down again, and in the mirrored light below, she saw her own reflection staring back, except the reflection blinked a moment after she did. She stumbled back, gasping, It's mimicking us." Cole didn't move. He was transfixed, eyes wide, lips trembling. "No," he said softly. "It's remembering us." The colonel barked orders. Soldiers began retreating, some muttering prayers, others simply staring into the inverted stars like moths too stunned to flee the flame. One man dropped his rifle when his own reflection smiled before he did. The sphere pulsed again, slower now, deeper, and for a moment the entire valley seemed to breathe with it. The lights on the perimeter flickered. Every watch ticked in perfect synchrony. Even the shadows seemed to inhale. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The hum ceased. The surface dulled back to mud-colored stillness. The stars below faded one by one, vanishing like embers smothered by water. Cameras rebooted. The generators stuttered back to life. But no footage showed anything. The recordings were empty, no light, no sound, just a faint background hiss of static that grew louder the longer anyone listened. By morning, the lake was as it had been, silent, unremarkable, a basin of gray water beneath a pale sky. But those who had seen it knew the truth, that for one night, the stars had come closer than they were meant to, not falling, not reflected, but returning. And somewhere in that impossible depth, something had looked back. No one saw Adrian leave the base that night. The guards had grown weary after weeks of silent, inexplicable duty, and the colonel had retreated into the command trailer, rereading reports that explained nothing. The hum had stopped, yes, but that only made the silence unbearable. It pressed against the eardrums like depth itself. Adrian Cole walked alone to the edge of the lake, his wetsuit half-zipped, his regulator hissing softly in the night air. The stars above were faint, diffused by thin mist, but the water below was unervingly dark, too smooth, too deliberate, as though waiting for him. He paused at the shoreline, staring into that black mirror. He could almost see the ghost of his own outlined there, hovering, patient. The dive was unauthorized. He hadn't told Nadia, hadn't logged a plan, hadn't even taken the usual equipment besides a suit, tank, and helmet recorder. There was something unfinished, something he needed to see. The sphere of light, the whisper through the recorder, the reflection that didn't follow, these had burned into his mind, demanding completion. He stepped into the water. The temperature didn't match the air. It was warm, unnaturally so, and dense, as if heavier than water should be. His descent began slowly, the surface folding over his shoulders with a soundless ripple. The beam from his helmet light stretched down only a few feet before fading into gold-gray murk. There was no silt now, No debris, only a depth that looked more like distance than matter. At 12 feet, he stopped. The lake bed wasn't where it should have been. The sonar readout blinked random numbers, negative depths, coordinates that didn't exist. His breathing grew louder in his ears. He rotated slowly, the beam of his lamp cutting through nothing, until he caught sight of movement. It wasn't fish. It wasn't light. It was himself. A face in his visor. His face, staring back from inside the glass. At first, he thought it was reflection, but when he blinked, the other didn't. The figure inside his visor moved half a second late, eyes tracking him with a delay that felt intentional. Every gesture, every breath, returned a fraction behind, like an echo rendered in flesh. He froze. The air in his tank hissed unevenly, his own pulse loud enough to fill the suit. He raised a hand slowly, trembling, and his reflection raised its own in mockery. Half beat behind, half smile forming where his mouth stayed still. He whispered, barely audible through the intercom, "What are you?" His reflection's lips moved, just out of sync, shaping the same question. But the voice that came through his headset wasn't his own. It was softer, layered, many voices folding into one. "Still you." He jerked back, kicking upward instinctively, bubbles spiraling around him like silver dust. The water seemed to resist, heavy, viscous, pulling him down even as he climbed. His headlamp flickered, cutting out for a breathless second, and in that darkness he saw not one reflection but dozens, faces overlapping his, blinking at different intervals, each trapped behind glass that wasn't there. He broke the surface with a gasp that tore the quiet apart. The air was sharp, cold, tasting of ozone. He ripped off his mask, sucking in gulps of night. The sky above was moonless, scattered with dull stars. His hands shook uncontrollably. Then he looked down. The surface of the lake was perfect again, mirror smooth, flawless. And there he was, staring back. But his reflection wasn't moving. It stood in the water, shoulders just above the surface, helmet still on, face still visible behind the visor. Its eyes, his eyes, were open, unblinking, watching. Adrian wiped his face, water dripping from his hair, then raised a hand hesitantly. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed frozen, expressionless, like something waiting to understand him. He took a step closer to the edge. The reflection leaned slightly forward, but only enough to suggest awareness, not imitation. "Hello?" he said, barely more than breath. The reflection tilted its head the other way, a slow, deliberate motion that wasn't a copy but an answer. Behind it, faintly, the stars began to move, those impossible, submerged constellations shifting, aligning around the image like a halo forming underwater. Adrian stepped back, heart hammering. The reflection didn't fade. It leaned farther forward, as though about to climb out of the water, its surface distorting like stretched glass. Ripples spread outward without sound. Then the visor and the reflection lit up from within, just faintly, enough for Adrian to see what lay behind the glass. It wasn't his face anymore. It was a pilot's skull, the same one he had seen in the cockpit, clean, white, framed in darkness. Its jaw moved once, slow and mechanical, like the beginning of a word. Adrian stumbled backward, slipping in the mud, his light catching the water one last time. The reflection still stood there, upright and motionless, head slightly turned as though studying him. Then, as the wind rose again, the surface of the lake trembled just once and smoothed itself out completely. The reflection remained. Even as Adrian staggered away, breathless and half delirious, he knew it was still there, frozen in that dark mirror, watching him go. And when he looked back from the ridge minutes later, panting under the weight of dread, the lake reflected nothing at all, only the stars beneath. By dawn, the entire operation had changed hands. The Air Force convoy that had sealed the perimeter was replaced overnight by black, unmarked vehicles and personnel who carried no insignia. The locals, who had grown used to the hum of generators, now heard only the low drone of portable radar dishes and the occasional distant thud of earth-moving equipment. Even the colonel, who had once been the unquestioned authority on site, found himself relegated to the background. his orders quietly overridden by men who spoke in clipped technical phrases and carried tablets instead of rifles. They set up a new array along the ridge: thermal scanners, magnetometers, and something that looked suspiciously like a portable neutrino detector. At their center stood a single console surrounded by cables and blinking lights, operated by a woman in a white field coat. She introduced herself only as Director Aleri, though no one had the clearance to ask from which agency she came. At 0417 hours, the first anomaly appeared. The infrared sensors began to bloom with light, an expanding sphere of radiance that seemed to pulse deep beneath the lake bed. Its coordinates indicated an impossible depth, nearly 3 miles below the known geological floor. The thermal image displayed a perfect circle, symmetrical, steady, emitting constant heat, but with no corresponding seismic activity. Dr. Nadia Voss, called in for consultation, stood beside Aleri and stared at the monitor, the red-white orb rotating slowly on-screen. "That's not geothermal," she said. "There's no venting, no plume. It's not connected to any mantle activity." Aleri nodded without looking up. "We know. It's not emitting heat. It's emitting patterned radiation." Nadia frowned. "Patterned?" "Pulse sequence. Repeating every 21 minutes. Electromagnetic and photonic combined. Like a..." She hesitated, choosing the word carefully. "Like a heartbeat that's aware it's being watched." The term made its way through the ranks quickly. By midday, the sphere had a designation: Artifact 2. The implication was obvious. Artifact 1 was a plane, the one that should never have been intact, that had housed a black box which still ticked after 70 years. Artifact 2 was what lay beneath it. Cole was not supposed to be there. After his unauthorized dive, he'd been confined to quarters and placed under medical observation. But when he overheard the technicians whispering about a second source, he slipped out under the cover of night and made his way to the observation tent. When he saw the live feed, the glowing orb buried beneath the digital topography, he stopped breathing for several seconds. "It's moving," he said finally. Aleri turned to him, unamused. "Dr. Cole, you are not cleared." But he was right. The coordinates on the side of the monitor shifted, incrementing by fractions of a degree. The sphere was not stationary. It was drifting, slowly, precisely, as though tracing a circular path beneath them. "It's orbiting," Nadia murmured. "Under the ground?" one of the engineers said. "That's..." "Not possible," Aleri finished for him. "And yet the readings hold. Every 61 minutes. The trajectory changes by 0.008 radians. Its position relative to the surface remains equidistant, as though it's tethered to a point above the lake." Cole leaned closer, eyes wide. "That's not an orbit. That's an observation loop. It's moving around us." Aleri didn't respond. She tapped the monitor, zooming in on the spectral display. Around the main sphere, faint secondary echoes began to appear. Tiny motes of radiation, dimmer but synchronized. They followed the larger object like satellites. By 0900 hours, the base sensors began picking up electromagnetic fluctuations across all frequencies. Radios buzzed with fragments of unintelligible speech. Drones lost GPS lock and hovered in silent confusion. The air temperature dropped by 6 degrees in less than an hour. Then the ground began to hum. It wasn't vibration in the traditional sense. It was resonance, a sound below the threshold of hearing, but felt in every cell. Mugs trembled. Fluorescent lights flickered. The data screens began to pulse in rhythm with the same 21-minute interval the sphere emitted. Aleri ordered the main feed isolated. The technicians rerouted all external communications through fiber to prevent interference, but it made no difference. The signal wasn't entering from outside. It was bleeding through the equipment itself, as if the sphere's pulse had become embedded in the power grid. Cole watched, transfixed. "It's syncing with us," he said. "Every cycle. It's adjusting its path, correcting, like it's learning our position." "Learning?" Aleri turned toward him sharply. He nodded slowly. "It's moving with precision. Every time we shift a sensor, it compensates. Look." He pointed to the feed. "It's tracking movement. Every time someone walks near the water, the coordinates change slightly. It's following mass." Human mass? Cole hesitated. No, conscious mass. The words lingered longer than sound should. Nadia felt the meaning settle in her stomach like ice. The hum grew stronger, pressing from the inside out, until every breath seemed to vibrate. At 0942 hours, the sphere accelerated. The movement was small but undeniable, its coordinates sliding several meters eastward in under a minute. On the seismic map, it appeared to spiral upward, looping closer to the surface. Every loop brought with it a flicker across the infrared grid, like flashes of light under invisible water. Altitude rising, Nadia whispered, remembering the recording's words. The room went silent. Then the speakers emitted a burst of static, loud enough to make everyone flinch. Out of that static came a voice. Not broadcasted, not transmitted, just there. Reverse flight confirmed. Alari's face drained of color. The technician beside her muttered a prayer. The sphere on the screen pulsed once, twice, then split into 3 overlapping rings of light, orbiting one another in perfect harmony. For a moment, they appeared to form a structure, symmetrical, deliberate, incomprehensible. And then the feed went black. Every monitor died at once. The hum stopped. The silence that followed felt alive. In the distance, through the tent flap, the lake shimmered faintly under the first light of morning. The air smelled faintly metallic, the way it had the day they found the plane. And somewhere far below, miles beneath the Earth's crust, Artifact 2 continued to move, steady, unhurried, circling the point above like a moon orbiting a reflection. The first sonar return came at 22:09 hours. A single ping, routine, mechanical, unremarkable, descended from the surface arrays and came back wrong. Instead of a clean reflection, the echo returned fractured, its waveform jagged and dense. The technician on duty, a young man named Heller, leaned closer to the monitor and frowned. The ping wasn't noise, it had rhythm. Short, long, long, short. The kind of rhythm you don't get from rock strata or thermal pockets. He ran it again. The same pattern. Then again. The data lined up perfectly. The intervals deliberate. He stared for a full minute before calling out, "Dr. Voss, you need to hear this." Nadia arrived in seconds, pulling her headset over damp hair. The hum that had haunted the camp for weeks had become background to her now, like tinnitus that the body eventually learns to accept. But the sound playing through the console wasn't a hum. It was language. Short, 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 long pause. She blinked. That's not random. Cole appeared behind her, drawn by the tone. What frequency? 60 kilohertz, she said, eyes fixed on the oscillating trace. Same as a deep sonar sweep. He leaned forward, brow furrowing as the pattern repeated. Tap, tap, top, tap, pause. Then again. Tap, tap, top, tap. He whispered. Morse. Heller looked confused. What's it saying? Cole didn't answer immediately. He mouthed the rhythm once more, counting the intervals. OPN. The word hung in the air like smoke. They ran the ping again 3, 4, 5 more times. Each return came identical in spacing, but slightly different in tone. The pitch seemed to rise with each cycle, shifting a few hertz higher every pass, as if the sender were testing the boundaries of their instruments. The sound didn't bounce, it conversed. Nadia turned to the others. "It's using our signal," she said. "It's replying through the same frequency we're sending." By midnight, the camp was fully awake. All remaining personnel gathered around the monitors, watching as the sonar feed repeated the pattern on loop. Engineers cross-referenced the intervals. Spectrographers analyzed harmonic decay. Linguists were summoned by secure line. The conclusion was unanimous. The sound was structured, purposeful. The official term entered the logs as Acoustic Event Series Alpha. Unofficially, they called it the knock. Every night after that, the message repeated, but never exactly the same. The spacing altered subtly, as though something was learning to articulate. The pitch shifted upward, then downward, almost musically. The sound waves no longer reflected passively. They arrived modulated, shaped, carrying overtones that shouldn't have been possible through water or rock. On the third night, When the pitch dipped low enough to vibrate through the tents, the ground itself began to respond. Cups trembled. Metal groaned softly. The surface of the lake rippled outward in concentric rings that didn't fade. They simply vanished at precise radius, as if absorbed. Cole barely slept. He sat outside his tent each night, notebook in hand, recording the changes in pitch, the interval variations. "It's a call and response," he muttered. "We send sonar. It sends a word. It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" Nadia asked quietly, eyes fixed on the still water. He hesitated. For us to answer. By the end of the week, the tone had climbed beyond human hearing. Only the instruments could register it now, a high, crystalline oscillation that made radio static hum in sympathy. The readings formed clean geometric curves on a spectrogram, 3 rising arcs, then 1 descending. The analysts realized it mirrored the pulse sequence from Artifact 2. At 2:17 that night, the pattern changed again. For the first time, the sonar didn't return immediately. There was a pause, 6 seconds of total silence. Then the response came back, stronger than before, shaking the surface sensors. 5 bursts. Short, short, long, long, short. Then a final tone, pure and piercing, sustained for 10 seconds before fading to nothing. Nadia felt the air vibrate through her chest. "It's not just saying, 'open' anymore," she said. "It's opening." No one spoke. The last tone lingered inside their bones long after the speakers went silent. Minutes later, the magnetometer spiked. The ground beneath the lake emitted a soft, measurable glow on the infrared grid, like a heartbeat in the soil. Artifact 2 had shifted again, climbing 20 meters closer to the surface. Its orbit had changed axis, no longer circular, but spiral, upward. Cole watched the coordinates drift across the screen, his hand trembling as he whispered, "It heard us." Nadia didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the last sonar readout, where the waveform of the word open had duplicated itself perfectly, except for one new pulse at the end, a 6th tone, too short to be random, too deliberate to ignore. She counted the interval. Dot. In Morse, it meant one thing, acknowledge. And from somewhere miles below, the lake answered with a low, resonant hum that didn't stop until morning. The order for man dives had been suspended weeks earlier. Every protocol forbade it now. No visibility, no stability, no certainty that what waited below even belonged to this world. But by the 10th night, after the pings had changed tone again, softer now, almost tender, Nadia Voss stopped caring about protocol. She stood at the edge of the lake in her suit, helmet under one arm, watching the flat water glow faintly from within. There was no moon. The illumination came entirely from beneath the surface, pale ribbons of light drifting slowly, changing color like deep-sea plankton dreaming of the sky. The others watched from the ridge in silence. No one tried to stop her. Even Director O'Leary, normally a fortress of control, said nothing, perhaps because they all felt the same pull, the same low rhythm that had settled into their bodies after nights of exposure. The hum was no longer a sound. It was a pulse, and it called her by name. Nadia secured her helmet and keyed the channel. Diver 1, commencing subdive to 200 feet. Recording on. Maintain uplink. Her voice was steady, but Cole, listening from the comm trailer, could hear the undertone of awe or surrender. She waded into the water slowly, the surface folding over her shoulders without a ripple. The light swallowed her whole. 202 hours. Depth 15 feet. Visibility low, but improving. The water feels different. Thick, but not opaque. 205 hours. Depth 40 feet. Still descending. No sign of the fuselage yet. But the readings, my instruments, are looping. It's like they're trying to sync with something. Static crackled to the line, faint and rhythmic. Cole adjusted the gain. The signal came back clearer, the background hum merging perfectly with Nadia's breath. 209 hours. Depth 90 feet. Jesus, I can see it. Her camera feed flickered to life on the monitor. At first, the image was just green-blue haze. Then something began to move within it. Filaments of light curling to the water, slow and deliberate, like curtains of aurora seen from beneath ice. They drifted around her, luminous and calm, bending in impossible arcs. Every color had weight, emerald bleeding into violet, gold into silver. The effect was hypnotic, unreal, almost holy. She turned slowly, the camera capturing vast columns of faint radiance descending into blackness. No source, no boundary, like cathedral beams that have forgotten the ground. Her voice came through again, softer this time. It's not sediment. It's not bioluminescence. It's alive. 211 hours. Depth, 130 feet. The light's reacting to movement. When I exhale, it pulses. When I stop breathing, it slows. It's responding to me. Cole leaned in toward the screen. The light patterns were beginning to organize. Spirals forming, breaking, reforming, as if folding around her presence. The spectrograph traced curves eerily similar to the Morse pattern for open. Nadia whispered. It's communicating through phase, not sound. The water molecules are, she broke off with a laugh, breathless. I can feel in my lungs. 213 hours. Depth, 160 feet. The glow intensified, swelling into a vast, slow rhythm. The camera's auto-exposure struggled to adapt. Streams of pale gold and deep indigo pulsed in perfect opposition. Inhale, exhale. The water was breathing. Cole's monitor trembled slightly. He spoke into the mic. Nadia, we're seeing distortion on your feed. Do you copy? Static answered, thin and distant. Then her voice returned, barely above a whisper. Adrian is not reflecting. The camera tilted downward. Through the drifting light, something vast shifted beneath her. The glow wasn't bouncing off the lake bed. It was emerging from it, rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping creature. She whispered again, voice trembling. It's breathing. The last frame from her camera showed the ribbons of Aurora curling inward toward a single point, a bright pulse directly beneath her, expanding like an eye opening in the dark. Then the feed imploded into static. Every monitor in the camp went black simultaneously. The sonar arrays screamed a single sustained tone that lasted 6 full seconds before cutting out. The hum that had haunted the valley since the drought began to cease entirely. When the lights flickered back, the lake was perfectly still. No glow, no ripples, only the reflection of the stars. Except one, brighter than the rest, hovering just beneath the surface, pulsing faintly as if it had followed her back. They searched all night. No bubbles, no trace, no body, only her helmet, recovered hours later at the shoreline, dry inside. On its visor, written in a faint condensation that shouldn't have existed, were 4 letters. Irregular, human, hurried. OPEN. By morning, the entire valley felt hollowed out, as though something enormous had inhaled during the night and forgotten to exhale. The air was dry. The sky washed a color in the lake. What was left of it looked calm enough to fool anyone passing through. But those who had stayed knew better. They had felt the pulse. They had heard Nadia's last breath. And now, they waited for the evidence. The only proof that what happened hadn't been another hallucination born of exhaustion and fear. Inside the command tent, the technicians worked in silence, replaying hours of data pulled from the dive feeds. Drives whirred. Screens blinked. Status bars crawled painfully slow. But when the first playback finished, the screen showed nothing. No light, no sound, just gray noise. Try the auxiliary file, someone said. They did. Same result. Each file was intact. The timestamps accurate, but every frame was empty, metadata without image, waveforms without sound, as if the information itself had been bleached clean. Even the backups, stored in separate systems, air-gapped from the main hub, returned identical blanks. The data was there, but unreadable, like the images had been replaced by the memory of having once existed. Director O'Leary stood behind the monitors, motionless. All of them. All but one, replied Heller, his voice barely steady. There's one frame that didn't scrub out. The room tightened around him. He dragged the file onto the main display. It was a still image, timestamped 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds, exactly 3 seconds before the dive feed went dead. For a moment, no one understood what they were looking at. The camera's orientation was inverted. The waterline shimmered faintly at the top, and below it, a vast pane of shifting light. Then someone whispered, "That's the surface, seen from underneath." The realization spread slowly. The image wasn't the depths. It was looking upward. Nadia's final frame, taken from below the lake, pointed at the world above. At first, it seemed beautiful. Light diffusing to the water, refracted into ribbons of silver and gold. But as they zoomed in, something broke the illusion. The sky visible through the surface wasn't right. The clouds were moving the wrong way, drifting east to west against the prevailing wind, and faster than any natural current could carry them. "Reverse flight confirmed," Cole murmured, the words escaping before he realized he'd spoken. The room went completely still. They played the single frame again and again, hoping for a glitch, some hint that the inversion was mechanical, a compression artifact, anything that made sense. But each analysis returned the same reading. The image was authentic, unaltered, impossible. The waterline itself seemed distorted, subtly curved inward, as if gravity had reversed at the moment of capture. Above it, clouds blurred into streaks, their shapes stretching backward like film unspooling in reverse. Light bled upward, not down, giving the whole image the uncanny geometry of a reflection that refused to behave like one. Cole stared at it for a long time. "She wasn't sinking," he said quietly. "She was ascending, but not here." No one answered. Later, when the infrared scans were run, they showed something new, an afterimage of heat blooming upward from beneath the lake. Not from Artifact 2's coordinates exactly, but from somewhere deeper, older. The pulse was faint, periodic, mirroring the Morse interval that had once spelled open. By noon, the team was ordered to pack. The camp was being relocated for safety. The words carried no conviction. Everyone knew the decision wasn't about safety. It was about containment. As they dismantled the antennae and sealed the crates, the monitors continued to loop the corrupted footage, flickering through blank frames that occasionally stuttered with flashes of white, like the echo of something trying to push through. Only the single still image remained whole. It stayed pinned to the center screen long after power was cut, its faint residual glow persisting in the glass. Outside, Cole stood at the water's edge, watching the lake in silence. The surface was mirror-flat, unbroken, yet when he leaned close enough, he thought he could see the clouds moving differently in the reflection, slowly, backward, like breath returned to lungs that were no longer there. He whispered, almost to himself, "It's still breathing." And in that instant, the air shifted, just slightly, as if something beneath the ground had exhaled again, long and slow, turning the stillness into a promise. By nightfall, the camp was gone, but the lake remained, and when the last truck crested the ridge, the water surface trembled once, faintly, before smoothing again, leaving only the sky reflected perfectly upside down, its clouds drifting ever so gently the wrong way. They tried to stop him, of course. The new agency men surrounded Cole's quarters, citing decompression trauma, psychological fatigue, classified containment protocol. They said it all with voices that had never once touched the lake. But nothing in their rehearsed vocabulary could reach the kind of need that had begun to live inside him. He couldn't sleep anymore. Every night, the sound of the water filled his skull. Not a hum now, but breathing, soft and measured, as if something below was matching his pulse. He'd wake with his chest tight, lungs aching like he'd been holding his breath for hours. And when he'd look out across the valley, the lake would be shining faintly in the dark, as though aware of his gaze. On the 5th morning after Nadia's disappearance, before sunrise, he broke through the perimeter fence. He moved with the calm of a man following gravity, not disobedience. The sky was pale silver, the air cool and brittle. In his suit, the last functional dive unit they hadn't packed away. Adrian Cole walked into the water without a word. The sensors on shore recorded his descent for exactly 3 minutes before they began to fail. For 02 hours. Depth 10 feet. Telemetry steady. Pressure normal. Oxygen flow optimal. For 03 hours. Depth 40 feet. Readings begin to fluctuate. The water temperature drops by 11 degrees in 12 seconds. Heart rate elevated. For 04 hours. Depth 70 feet. Barometric pressure, data freezes. All secondary instruments enter feedback loop. Sonar return garbled, multiple echoes detected, identical amplitude, no source. Then the voice channel activated. "This is Cole," he said, breathing slow and even, visibility low. No sign of the fuselage. The water's still live again. Same light as before. Soft green, gold at the edges. A long pause. Then quieter, "I can hear them." On the surface, the monitors flickered. The technicians leaned close, straining to hear. "They're whispering," he said. "God, it's so many voices overlapping. Male, female, I can't make out words yet." The sound bled faintly through the comm line, a texture more than a tone. Not static, not interference. Human vowels, unformed consonants, the rise and fall of language trying to remember itself. "Pressure's wrong," Cole said. "I can feel it, but the gauges are gone." "Doesn't matter. I'm going deeper." Director O'Leary's voice snapped to the radio. "Dr. Cole, abort immediately. We're losing telemetry." He ignored her. "They're closer now. The voices, they're not coming from below. They're around me. The water's carrying them. Like the whole lake is speaking." At 150 feet, every mechanical sensor went dark. The only signal left was the open comm channel, his breathing rhythmic, slow, deliberate. "They're saying something," he whispered. "It's layered, repeating familiar." The background murmur swelled. The technicians could hear it now, too. Thousands of voices, indistinct but undeniably human. Some laughed faintly. Others wept. A few syllables rose to the surface, sharp and clear. "Here, below, remember?" Cole's breathing hitched. "Nadia," he said suddenly, "I heard." The transmission broke into static. Then, faintly, a second voice bled through, female, distant, shaped by water. "It's not reflection," it said. "It's us." O'Leary froze, headset trembling in her hands. Cole surfaced now. No response. The next 30 seconds of audio were untranslatable. Not noise, music, almost harmonic. The frequencies mapped into geometric progressions, spiraling upward, looping back, repeating themselves in perfect symmetry. Then Cole's voice returned, soft and awed. "They're showing me." "What are you seeing?" A long exhale. "Home." The last telemetry ping recorded his depth at 230 feet, a reading that made no physical sense given the lake's maximum depth of 180. "Pressures." His words cut off mid-syllable. O'Leary shouted into the mic, "Cole, repeat." "Pressures what?" Static, then a whisper, low and intimate, so close it seemed to come from inside the speakers. "Breathe with us." The water sensor spiked instantly. Heat, magnetism, sound, all rising together in a single, impossible pulse. The shoreline trembled. Every display in the tent went white, then blank. When power returned, the lake was calm again. No bubbles, no movement, no Adrian Cole. Only one sensor, an old analog hydrophone, forgotten in the redundancy stack, had continued to record. When played back, it contained 30 minutes of near silence, interrupted every few seconds by a faint pattern of human breath, overlapping and synchronized, as though hundreds of lungs were inhaling and exhaling together. And at the 31-minute mark, just before the tape ran out, a voice, Adrian's, calm and clear, spoke one last line. "It's not the lake that's deep," he said. "It's the sky." Then nothing. That morning, the sun rose pale and wrong, as if reluctant to illuminate what it could no longer claim. The reflection on the water showed clouds moving backward again, slower this time, as it waited for something or someone to return. The light down there was soft now, almost kind. It pulsed in long, slow waves, illuminating the wreck like breath under translucent skin. The plane had returned to view as if time had decided to forgive it. No rust, no silt, no sign of its 70 years in darkness. Its hull gleamed faintly in the emerald glow, metal smooth and impossibly unbroken. Adrian Cole descended through it like a dreamer entering the memory of a place, his flippers stirring no sediment, His bubbles absorbed before they reached the surface. His depth gauge spun uselessly. His pressure sensors had long since surrendered. The world above no longer existed in numbers or physics. Only light and heartbeat and the murmur of voices, thousands of them, flowing through the water in long, overlapping syllables. He recognized some of the tones now. Nadia's voice, faint and rhythmic, braided with others he couldn't name. They weren't calling to him exactly. They were guiding him. Ahead, the cockpit glowed faintly, its windows shimmering like eyes behind frost. The hatch hung slightly ajar, its hinges untouched by corrosion. Adrian drifted closer, one gloved hand brushing the fuselage. It was warm again, always warm. He entered. Inside, everything was as it had been on the day the lake swallowed it, except for one thing, the pilot's helmet. It lay neatly in the captain's chair, upright, secured by its harness. No bones this time. No decay. Just a helmet. Facing forward, patient, waiting. He hovered in front of it, lamp beam trembling slightly in his hand. The visor gleamed dark, opaque, but not dead. Something moved within it. Slow rotation. Faint points of light that weren't reflections. He leaned closer. Stars. Tiny, perfect. Sharp points of light turning lazily counterclockwise behind the glass. They weren't mirroring the sky above. They were forming constellations of their own, strange and unfamiliar. The kind of stars that shouldn't exist underwater, or anywhere he knew. The voices swelled around him now, low and dense. They weren't words but rhythm, rising and falling in time with the motion of the stars. The sound was less like whispering now, and more like breathing turned into language. Adrian reached out. His fingers hovered just inches from the visor. "Who are you?" he whispered. "What are you showing me?" The water seemed to tighten around him, its pressure both crushing and gentle. He felt warmth against his palm before he even touched the helmet, as if it already knew he would. He wiped the glass. For a moment, nothing, just the smear of his glove, the swirl of motion. Then the stars behind the visor froze. The light dimmed. The voices went silent, and the face beneath the glass opened its eyes. They weren't bones. They weren't sockets. They were alive, human and not, too clear, too bright. Each iris holding the same impossible constellations he'd seen inside the visor, galaxies condensed into pupils. They blinked once, slow and soundless, and the glass between them and him seemed to melt away, thinning until he felt his breath catch. "Adrian," it said, or maybe thought. The sound entered him rather than his ears. "You stayed." He couldn't move. Every muscle vibrated under the weight of the voice. "Nadia?" He managed, though he already knew it wasn't her. It was something larger, wearing her memory like a gesture of mercy. "Not her," the voice said gently. "With her." The stars within his eyes began to turn again. Faster now, counterclockwise spirals deepening into vortexes. Behind them, darkness bloomed, swallowing the glow of the cockpit until only the eyes remained. Adrian's heart rate spiked, his vision tunneling. He reached for his tether line, gone. The console in front of him pulsed faintly, displaying symbols that rearranged themselves every second, not in letters, not in numbers, but in motion. Folds of light moving in patterns that matched his own breathing. The being or memory or echo tilted its head. The motion was human, tender, curious. "Do you see yet?" It whispered. He tried to answer, but the water entered his mouth and lungs without drowning him. It filled him with warmth, with light. The helmet in front of him began to dissolve, not into dust, but into reflection, its edges blurred, merging with the space around it. For a moment, he saw himself inside the glass, his own face mirrored and inverted, eyes glowing the same impossible blue as the stars. Then the cockpit vanished. The water opened around him, vast and endless. He wasn't sinking or floating anymore. He was falling sideways, pulled along by invisible gravity toward a horizon that wasn't a line, but a curve of light. He saw the plane stretching below him like a shadow turning inside out, its wings folding and unfolding like breath. The voice returned, softer now, almost intimate. "It's not death, Adrian. It's reversal." "Reversal of what?" he whispered, though his mouth no longer made sound. "Flight." He looked down one last time. The lake bed was gone. In its place was a sky, clouds moving backward, stars rotating in reverse, time folding neatly over itself. The eyes beneath the visor blinked again, and for a heartbeat, he felt his own eyelids move in sync. The last thing he saw before the light claimed him completely was his reflection inside that glass, smiling gently, eyes open, watching him from the other side. Then the feed cut out, and the sensors on the surface recorded a single, steady pulse echoing upward through the water. Not Morse for SOS. The inverse. Morse for SOO, the old, forgotten shorthand used in early radio for one meaning only, returning. The satellite pass wasn't scheduled. It wasn't supposed to be. At 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, a weather monitoring satellite, NOAA 27, swept over the valley by automated course, capturing high-resolution images for routine drought mapping. The data reached the analysis station in Maryland 90 minutes later. The technician on shift, half asleep with coffee cooling beside him, noticed the anomaly first. He thought it was a sensor fault, a lens obstruction, maybe a cloud shadow. But clouds didn't move like that. They didn't erase half of a landscape cleanly, like a knife through film. He zoomed in. The top half of the image displayed exactly what he expected. A parched valley, the faint metallic skeleton of a camp, equipment trucks, and the shrunken oval of the lake. But the lower half, where the water should have been, was gone. Not distorted, not blurred, gone. In its place stretched a perfect void, pitch black, depthless, immaculate. It wasn't shadow or underexposure. The surrounding light refracted against its edge, bent inward, swallowed whole. It was the color of absence. The technician reset the filters, ran calibration, reloaded the raw feed. The same. He checked for a packet corruption. None. He checked for interference from solar flares, cosmic rays, thermal noise. Nothing. Every diagnostic came back normal. Then he looked closer. Within that void, faint points of light glimmered, small, sharp, deliberate. Constellations. At first he assumed stars, but when he overlaid known celestial charts, none matched. The spatial relationships were wrong. Too symmetrical, too dense in certain quadrants, too sparse in others. They weren't above the earth. They were beneath it, or something's memory of a sky inverted under glass. He printed a frame and sent it to his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, the feed was classified, all downstream servers locked. The data pipeline rerouted through defense channels. Hours later, in a windowless room somewhere under Colorado, the image was displayed again, now surrounded by men and women who wore no insignia and spoke in low, deliberate tones. Director O'Leary stood among them. Her face was drawn, eyes hollow. She had been pulled back from a valley 2 days before, evacuated for evaluation. But she'd known this would come. She'd felt it in her dreams, the hum that had stopped at her ears, but not in her bones. "What are we looking at?" one of the analysts asked. O'Leary didn't answer. She simply stepped closer, fingertips grazing the cold edge of the monitor. "Zoom in," she said. The operator complied. The black expanse filled the screen. Slowly, the unfamiliar constellations resolved into clearer form. Pinpricks of light that weren't still. They moved, imperceptibly at first, then with measurable drift, rotating counterclockwise across the void. Someone whispered, "It's the same rotation rate as the sky reflection anomaly." Another voice, "Ma'am, these stars, if they're real, don't correspond to any galactic coordinates. It's like we're seeing through something." O'Leary closed her eyes. "Not through," she said softly. "Into." The operator overlaid frames from earlier passes. The void persisted, changing subtly between images. Each time, the constellations inside had shifted a few degrees, as though orbiting an invisible center far below the lake. The light from them didn't cast or scatter. It only existed in the digital capture, never visible to the human eye in real time. But one engineer, a quiet astrophysicist named Shale, noticed something stranger. When he adjusted the exposure curve, the constellations expanded, not fading, but approaching, each point swelling into a faint spiral pattern. And at the heart of those spirals, pixel by pixel, something began to emerge. A reflection, not of stars, but of faces. Dozens, hundreds, all faint, all staring upward. Eyes open, mouth still, like the reflections of people looking into a mirror from the other side of water. The room went silent. Shale stammered, That's pareidolia, right? Lights scatter from. Enhance contrast, Larry said. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. The image deepened. The faces clarified. Some were calm, some terrified, some unrecognizable, blurred by motion that shouldn't have been possible in a still frame. And in the center of them all, one face stared directly at the lens. Perfectly clear, perfectly human. Adrian Cole. His eyes glowed faintly, the same impossible hue recorded in the cockpit feed. In each iris, a pattern of stars rotated, counterclockwise. Someone whispered, "He's alive down there." Larry shook her head slowly. "No, not down there." She pointed to the void on the screen. "Down here." A murmur spread through the room as the analyst cross-referenced the image against Earth's coordinates. The constellations corresponded to no known hemisphere, but their arrangement matched precisely the sonar maps of the lake's internal resonance patterns. The void wasn't sky. It was mirror, and whatever was reflecting in it wasn't space. It was memory. By the time they realized the satellite itself had begun transmitting back the same black pattern across unrelated coordinates, oceans, deserts, mountain ranges. It was too late. Every new image showed the same phenomenon spreading, subtle but undeniable. Reflections appearing where there should be none, absorbing half the frame. Constellations rearranging themselves into slow, deliberate spirals. Back in the valley, the lake remained utterly still, a perfect mirror. From the ridge, it looked like a hole punched clean through the earth, leading not down but inward. And if one stood at the right angle, just before dawn, the reflection no longer showed the sky at all. Only the black, star-filled void from the satellite's image, revolving slowly, eternally counterclockwise. Sometimes, on the windless nights that followed, the townspeople swore they could hear faint whispering from that direction. Hundreds of overlapping voices speaking in tones too human to be imagination. They never agreed on what the words were, but those who listened longest said it always began the same way. A breath, a pulse, then a single, steady word, return. It began quietly, almost shyly, the way impossible things often do. The first reports came from truckers crossing the Ridge Highway after midnight. Streaks of light rippling above the lake like oil sheen, green fading to violet, then to a pale silver that made their dashboards flicker. They thought it was Aurora Borealis, until one of them noticed something that didn't fit. The same rippling pattern moving beneath the water, perfectly synchronized with the sky. By dawn, the locals were gathered along the shoreline, wrapped in blankets and disbelief. Word had spread faster than the military roadblocks could stop it. Phones were useless. No video would play back. No lens could capture the sight. But to the naked eye, it was undeniable. The heavens had found their reflection. Above the lake, ribbons of aurora swayed soundlessly across the night. Below it, identical ribbons flowed in mirror inversion, as if the water had become a window to an equal sky turned upside down. Every color overhead had its counterpart below, red to red, gold to gold, each movement tracing itself in reverse. At first, it was beautiful. Too beautiful to fear. Couples stood hand in hand, faces glowing in the double light. Children laughed, tossing pebbles that never broke the surface. The ripples faded instantly, as though absorbed by glass. Someone began to weep softly, not from terror, but awe. Then the constellations changed. The familiar stars, Orion, Cassiopeia, the Dipper, began to rearrange themselves, sliding against the night like magnets losing alignment. They bent toward the horizon above the lake, their patterns dissolving and reforming into new geometries. Spirals, arcs, perfect circles of light, and the same shapes appeared beneath, mirrored in the depths, brighter, sharper, more deliberate. The two skies, real and reflected, began to move together, each responding to the other's motion, as though joined by invisible thread. By 1 a.m., the synchronization was perfect. Every shift above repeated below. Every shimmer mirrored exactly. The stars pulsed as one. Scientists arrived within hours, setting up instruments that promptly failed. Compasses spun. GPS signals reversed coordinates, reading south where north should be. Clocks lost seconds, then gained them back. Static filled every radio band, carrying faint harmonics that, when slowed down, formed human-like intervals. From the ridge, Director O'Leary watched the twin Aurora's pulse. She had returned against orders, drawn by the same need that had taken Cole and Nadia. The light painted her face in alternating hues of violet and gold. Around her, the crowd fell into silence. The air felt charged, not electric, but biological. Each wave of light pressed gently against the skin, like breathing. The wind had stopped entirely. Even the leaves hung still, arrested mid-rustle. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant tone, low as thunder yet perfectly sustained, rising from both sky and water simultaneously. It wasn't heard so much as felt, in ribs, in teeth, in thought. People fell to their knees, clutching their heads, not from pain, but from the unbearable sense of being noticed. Those who didn't flee watched in rapture as the twin lights began to converge. The aurora overhead dipped lower, ribbons of radiance stretching downward toward the lake. At the same time, the reflection below rose upward, tendrils of liquid light climbing the air like vines. When they met at the surface, there was no explosion, no sound, only a shimmer, a ripple that passed outward in perfect silence. For one impossible second, sky and lake became indistinguishable, a single sphere of light turning within itself. As if Earth had forgotten which way was up, every shadow vanished. Every reflection became real. Then, as suddenly as it began, the glow dimmed. The auroras faded to ghostly gray. The stars, both real and reflected, froze and realigned into new constellations, ones that no telescope or ancient chart had ever recorded. Across the world, astronomers stared at their instruments in disbelief. The night sky had changed, not by rotation, not by atmosphere, but by design. Back at the lake, those who remained swore they could still see motion beneath the surface. Faint silhouettes moving through the starlit water, slow and human, as if walking beneath glass. One man said he saw a woman's face looking up at him from the depths, eyes open, calm, breathing in rhythm with the stars. Another said he heard voices whispering his name in time with his heartbeat. And just before dawn, when the aurora's last trace faded from the horizon, the reflection below shimmered one final time, releasing a single pulse that rippled across the valley and into the bones of every living thing. It wasn't loud, but everyone who felt it understood. It was a word: return. By sunrise, the sky had restored its calm, but every reflection, in puddles, in windows, in eyes, showed something new beneath the surface. Stars that didn't belong, turning slowly, counterclockwise. They sealed the valley within a day. Convoys pouring before sunrise, flatbeds, fencing trucks, armored carriers with floodlights mounted like artificial moons. The Air Force reestablished command under a new code name, Operation Mirrortide, and the perimeter stretched 10 miles in every direction. Signs appeared overnight: quarantine zone, NO entry, environmental hazard. It was theater, of course. No one believed the story of toxic luminescent algae any more than they had believed toxic sediment. But the barriers weren't meant to keep the public out. They were meant to keep something else in. By nightfall, the camp pulsed with tension. Generators thrummed. Floodlights pointed inward, illuminating the lake from every angle. Yet despite the glare, the water still reflected only the sky. Perfect, unyielding, untouched by light. The soldiers stationed along the southern line were the first to hear it. At first, it sounded like surf, though there was no wind to stir the surface. Then the sound thickened, deepened, resolved into intervals, long, low tones layered in perfect harmony, too ordered to be natural. "It's humming," one of them radioed. The water, like it's tuning itself. The message was logged as fatigue-induced misperception. But by the next hour, 37 personnel across 3 sectors reported the same phenomenon. A low, harmonic vibration carried through the air, audible even through ear protection. Recordings failed. The microphones captured only silence, but the soldiers swore the tones were real, felt in their chests, in their bones. Some compared it to the sound of a choir heard through water. Others said it was more like breathing rendered into music. Then came the vertigo. It began subtly, lightheadedness, disorientation, nausea. But the symptoms didn't follow the normal curve of altitude or stress. They came in waves, perfectly timed with the harmonic pulses from the lake. When the hum rose in pitch, the soldiers' balance faltered. When it fell, they swayed backward, eyes unfocused, breath synchronizing with the rhythm. Medical officers rushed to evaluate them. Blood pressure normal. Oxygen levels normal. Neurological scans inconclusive. Yet those affected reported the same words over and over. It's calling me. By midnight, 5 soldiers had crossed the first barrier. Security footage, later classified, showed them moving slowly, deliberately, weapons slung loosely over their shoulders. They weren't running or panicking. They were walking calm, in trance, heads tilted slightly as if listening to something only they could hear. When guards tried to intercept, the deserters didn't resist. They simply kept moving forward. Even after warnings, even after gunfire cracked through the dark. One of them, a lieutenant named Garvey, was heard speaking softly into the comm before the transmission cut out. His last words were, "It's singing the shape of home." His body was never found. None of them were. The next night, the harmonics changed key. Instruments picked up subsonic resonance, oscillating at frequencies that matched human heartbeats. Some personnel experienced what they called temporal drift, the sensation of missing time, of blinking and finding the stars above in different positions. Watches froze, restarted, froze again. One technician monitoring magnetic fluctuations described it as standing on the edge of a song. Director O'Leary, reappointed to command by necessity rather than consent, ordered all personnel to wear sensory dampers, noise-canceling headgear, magnetic stabilizers, pulse regulators. It worked for a while, but only until the water began to move. Just before dawn, a ripple spread across the surface. Slow, deliberate, circular. The harmonic hum grew louder, reaching intervals too complex to chart, resonating with such precision that nearby metal vibrated in sympathy. One of the floodlights shattered. Another bent forward as though pushed by unseen pressure. From the observation deck, O'Leary could see them. Faint shapes forming in the shimmer, silhouettes of people or their reflections, moving within the lake's skin. They were walking, not swimming. Their steps matched the hum's rhythm perfectly. She turned to the comms operator. "Cut the lights." The order was obeyed instantly. Darkness swallowed the valley. The hum continued. In that darkness, the soldiers could see it clearly. 2 worlds superimposed. The lake below glowing faintly with mirrored auroras, and above, the night sky beginning to twist again, stars rearranging like notes on a shifting staff. Somewhere amid that chorus of light and sound, a single human voice rose. Unamplified, untraceable male. "Adrian," it said. Then another voice joined it. "Nadia." The names rippled outward, overlapping, folding into harmony until the air itself began to sing. A corporal near the fence dropped his rifle and whispered, "They're not calling for us. They're calling through us." No one moved. No one dared breathe. And in the moment just before dawn, when the first pale light broke across the ridge, the humming stopped. For 6 full seconds, there was perfect silence. So perfect that it seemed unnatural, like the world itself had paused to listen. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the still water, came a single, slow pulse that shook the ground and every heart standing on it. The sensors recorded it as a frequency lower than hearing, below vibration, below physics itself. But to the soldiers who felt it, the meaning was unmistakable. It was a word. Closer. The tremor was first picked up at 2:37. A faint, rhythmic vibration rolling to the ground, too soft to register as an earthquake, too regular to dismiss as machinery. The seismic graphs drew smooth, looping waves, each pulse perfectly timed at 45 seconds apart. The pattern was biological, not tectonic. At first, the technicians thought the sensors were miscalibrated. But when the backup units, hundreds of miles apart, began tracing the same rhythm, the room went silent. "It's not fault activity," said Dr. Runn, voice thin in the dim red light of the monitoring tent. It's repeating. Like, she trailed off, watching the trace continue. Like a heartbeat. The phrase spread quickly through the comms channels. Heartbeat pattern confirmed. Base command demanded re-verification, so they linked to the national network. Within minutes, seismic stations as far north as Denali reported the same pulse arriving faintly through the bedrock, propagating outward from the lake like a slow drumbeat buried miles below. Each vibration carried harmonic resonance. Instruments translated into audio for analysis. The sound that came through was soft and low, almost tender, like a giant heart pumping somewhere beneath the crust. And with each pulse, the lights flickered, at first just around the camp, floodlights dimming and brightening in sync with the vibration. But within the hour, civilian grids across Fairbanks began to stutter. Street lamps blinked in perfect rhythm. Neon signs pulsed like breath. Even cars parked along the highway hummed faintly in tune with the invisible beat. Reports flooded in from nearby towns. Dogs barking toward the east. Compasses drifting. People waking in the night with pressure in their chest timed to the same unseen rhythm. By 3:12, every electrical system within 100 miles of the lake was syncing to it. An unintentional symphony of light and current following something buried deep below the earth. Then the lake began to glow, not from reflected light, not from bioluminescence. The illumination came from beneath, a steady radiance blooming outward like dawn reversed. It started faintly, an opaline shimmer under the surface, then brightened until the entire basin was a bowl of molten glass. The color wasn't constant. It shifted through hues no spectrum could name. Pale green bled into silver, then into a soft, living gold that seemed to breathe. The waves did not move. The light pulsed in exact rhythm with the seismic heartbeats. From the ridge, the effect was mesmerizing. The clouds above, low and heavy with rain, lit up from below, turning the night sky into an inverted aurora. The valley glowed with quiet, holy fire. Fairbanks saw it next. Residents emerged onto porches, thinking the horizon was on fire. But the light wasn't red. It was golden, ethereal, expanding in gentle waves. The underbellies of clouds illuminated from underneath, their shapes shifting with every beat. For the first time in recorded history, the sky shone from below. Power lines hummed audibly. Radios turned on by themselves, emitting only a low pulse matching the tremors. Air traffic control systems failed. Pilots reported ground-side luminescence visible at 30,000 feet, describing it as a second sunrise under clouds. Back at the command site, Director O'Leary stood in the observation tent, her face lit by the alien glow. "Is it geothermal?" someone asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the pulse monitor, each peak arriving exactly 45 seconds apart. "It's stabilizing," said Dr. Wren quietly. "Whatever's down there, it's gaining rhythm." O'Leary turned slowly toward the lake. "Rhythm implies intent," she said. The next pulse was stronger. The ground trembled lightly, dust falling from beams, cups rattling on tables. The sensors registered a second frequency beneath the first, higher, fainter, weaving through it like harmony in a song. "Two patterns now," Wren whispered. "Dual oscillation, one larger, one smaller. As if something's responding." O'Leary's jaw tightened. "Adrian," she murmured. "He's still down there." Outside, the glow intensified until the night lost all contrast. The clouds above no longer drifted. They rotated slowly in vast spirals, their edges catching gold and violet light from below. The air felt heavy, charged, almost reverent. At 3:38, a single tremor, louder than the rest, rippled through the valley. Every sensor spiked. For a moment, all sound vanished. Then the vibration returned, now stronger, deeper, unmistakably alive. It wasn't the rhythm of collapse or quake. It was a steady, measured thump of something vast waking up. The lights across Fairbanks dimmed simultaneously, then surged back to full power. The glow from the lake flared once, bright enough to cast shadows miles away, before softening again, steady, calm, patient. On every monitor, seismic graphs flattened, then resumed at a new tempo, slower, deliberate. A heartbeat slowed to rest after exertion. Dr. Wren whispered, It's adjusting to us. Outside, the golden light shimmered once more, and the next tremor came not as sound but as a whisper carried through the vibrating air. No one could tell where it came from, ground, sky, or water, but every human ear on site heard the same thing. A word, stretched through pressure and breath. Awake! The rupture began without sound. At 2:11, the lake's glow brightened so suddenly that the soldiers on the ridge covered their eyes. The pulse had grown faster throughout the night, every vibration tightening the valley's air, compressing the silence into something brittle. The seismic graphs went from rhythm to pattern, no longer a heartbeat, but a countdown. Then the surface split, not like water breaking, not like explosion or quake. It fractured, clean and geometric, a perfect seam of light slicing across the lake's center from shore to shore. The divide widened slowly, deliberately, like a fault opening in glass. The two halves remained motionless, held apart by invisible force. The glow poured upward between them. No spray, no noise, only radiance and a low hum that pressed into the teeth like pressure at depth. The divers were already in position. They had been ordered to deploy submersible recorders after the previous tremors, their cameras fixed on the lake bed. When the fracture appeared, every instrument engaged automatically. The first footage showed turbulence, rippling patterns of gold and blue light, streaming through the water. Then something impossible. A column of water began to rise. Not waves, not vapor. A solid, vertical pillar climbing from the center of the lake, as if gravity itself had reversed. It moved with eerie grace, unbroken, smooth, shimmering like liquid glass. Its sides caught the auroral light from beneath, refracting it into cascading patterns that danced across the clouds. From a distance, it looked like a massive mirror turned on end, one half of the world reflected vertically into the sky. Inside it, stars shimmered, but not the stars of that night. They moved in reverse, constellations rotating counterclockwise, their trajectories curving into unfamiliar geometries. It was the same sky seen beneath the water weeks before, only now standing upright, superimposed against its twin above. Jesus Christ, one of the operators whispered. It's showing the sky backward. The columns stretched higher, the upper end vanishing into low clouds. Sensors failed at 500 meters. The light distorted radio frequencies. Drones lost signal mid-ascent. Cameras kept rolling, though, their lenses trembling with the force of proximity. Then the silhouettes appeared. At first, just faint shadows suspended within the mirror's body, elongated, weightless, drifting upward to the column as though carried by slow current. Then more, dozens. They moved with impossible stillness, arms slightly extended, heads tilted as if in sleep. Some appeared to hold hands. Others rotated slowly in place. Their outlines wavered but remained unmistakably human. Are those, a technician began, voice cracking, bodies, another finished. But the forms didn't behave like corpses. They rose steadily, deliberately, their ascent perfectly synchronized with the lake's pulse. Their reflections, identical silhouettes, descended at the same rate from the mirrored sky above. The two sets met briefly at the column's midpoint, overlapping, merging, and then dissolving into the light. Inside the command tent, Director O'Leary stood rigid, headset clutched against her ear. Are we getting telemetry? Static. Then one clear voice from the diver relay, shaking, near hysterical. We're reading mass displacement. Not gas. Not heat. The column is hollow. No, it's concave. The water is folding inward. There's depth inside it, more than there should be. It's pulling upward. Pulling what? The diver didn't answer. On the live feed, the camera began to rotate. The operator shouted over the radio, but there was no response. The lens caught the rising column from below now, revealing something within the light. Faint structures, circular lattices forming around the silhouettes. They looked like ripples frozen in 3 dimensions, shells of motion, stacking upward like the ribs of an enormous, invisible creature breathing inside the water. The column's surface started to vibrate. The harmonic hum that had haunted the valley for weeks deepened into layered resonance. The glass-like walls shimmered with reflections, faces flickering within the surface, too quick to identify. Then the diver's voice returned, whispering, "They're not dead." "Repeat." Larry barked. "They're not dead," he said again, slower now, voice distant, reverent. "They're remembering. They're coming back up." A burst of static swallowed the transmission. The final seconds of recorded footage showed the silhouettes reaching the top of the column. Instead of emerging, they dissolved into blinding radiance, each form bursting outward in concentric rings of light. The column thinned, narrowing as if inhaling itself. The glow intensified until the cameras overloaded, frames bleaching white, and then with a sound like the sigh of a collapsing wave, the entire column folded inward and vanished. The halves of the lake snapped shut, no splash, no ripple, no sound. The glow faded instantly. The clouds above went dark, but for several seconds afterward, their undersides remained lit, as if the light still burned beneath them. Then that too faded, leaving the valley in silence. When the divers' drones were recovered hours later, their data logs contained one final burst of telemetry before the blackout. Temperature drop, magnetic surge, and an inexplicable audio signature. A slow, rhythmic pulse. 2 beats, then one pause. In Morse intervals, it spelled 3 letters. R-E-T, return. And though the sky remained black the rest of that night, the locals who stood on the ridges swore they saw faint, human-shaped shadows walking just beneath the surface of the lake, ascending, pausing, then slowly turning their gaze toward the stars above that no longer matched the heavens they had known. At first light, the soldiers thought it was over. The valley lay silent, shrouded in a mist that had rolled in from nowhere. The air smelled of rain and metal. Birds had returned, the first sound of life in weeks, and their calls echoed faintly over the ridge. The lake stretched out smooth and perfect, full once again, as if nothing had ever broken its surface. But that was impossible. Every instrument said it should have been empty. The sensors along the shoreline recorded no rainfall, no tributary inflow, no seismic subsidence that could refill a basin drained for months. The volume of water, millions of cubic meters, had simply reappeared between one frame of satellite footage and the next. And it was warm. Not surface warm, but radiant, as though something within was emitting heat, not reflecting it. By 6:14, Command had already ordered an orbital pass. The first image returned sharp and color-corrected, showing what looked like a normal lake at sunrise, gold light on ripples, fog on the far shore. But when the analysts switched to radar topography, the basin registered as void. "No depth," murmured the technician, his voice cracking. "It's not there. The water's not there." Everyone crowded closer. Thermal imaging returned next. False color hues, painting a temperature map that made no sense. The lake burned white-hot at the center, surrounded by concentric rings of cooler gradient, like heat radiating from a sun buried beneath the surface. Yet the air above was crisp and cold. They toggled to infrared. The screen went black. Then, slowly, tiny pinpoints of light began to bloom across it. Hundreds, thousands. "Enhance gain," said Director O'Leary, her voice low. The technician complied. The points resolved into dense clusters, star fields, perfect and bright, moving in slow, deliberate motion across the lake's infrared reflection. It wasn't random scatter. The patterns drifted, curved, and folded like the constellations they'd seen weeks before, those same unknown formations, rotating counterclockwise, nested within the water. The analyst whispered, "It's another sky." O'Leary leaned forward, eyes wide. "Not another. The same." On the live feed, the infrared imagery pulsed faintly, each light shifting in rhythm with the lake's subtle internal glow. Some clusters appeared to rise toward the surface, their brightness intensifying before fading again, as though breathing under a translucent lung of water. Then one of the operators gasped. Look, motion in the lower quadrant." The stars in one region were rearranging themselves, forming a spiral. In the center of that spiral, a single bright point expanded, glowing so intensely that the cameras automatically dimmed. The light didn't flicker, it winked, like an eye opening from within. All along the ridge, soldiers turned toward the water. The reflection on its surface was wrong again. The morning sky above was pale and quiet, but the lake mirrored a different scene entirely. A darker sky, stars faintly visible even in daylight, turning slowly in the opposite direction. A mirror world layered atop theirs. Larry whispered, "It's not a reflection, it's a containment." As the sun rose higher, the difference became more pronounced. The lake's color deepened from silver to cobalt, from cobalt to black glass. Yet through its surface, faint lights shimmered, not reflections of anything above, but independent movement within. They drifted like fish under ice, following invisible currents, weaving through star fields buried in liquid. Satellite operators confirmed what the naked eye couldn't see. The lake's spectral readings did not correspond to any known terrestrial material. Its reflectivity had inverted. It wasn't reflecting sunlight. It was absorbing starlight. One technician described it best. "It's not water anymore. It's the night holding its breath." At 8:03, the satellite feed captured something new. The star patterns beneath the lake shifted abruptly, forming a vast circular alignment, an arrangement of constellations that no human chart had ever recorded. Analysts overlaid the geometry and froze. The pattern wasn't random. It matched precisely the contour of the lake itself. "They're mapping it," someone said. "No," replied Larry. "They're mirroring it." As she spoke, a ripple passed across the surface, small, almost delicate, but its reflection didn't move. The two layers of water and light had become disconnected, the world above and the world below out of phase. Infrared sensors flared. Every star within the buried sky pulsed at once, brightening in perfect unison, a heartbeat of light. Then they dimmed again, settling into quiet motion, patient and steady. A radio operator, pale and shaking, broke the silence. "Ma'am," he said, "there's something broadcasting." "From where?" "Every frequency. It's the same tone repeating." "Let's hear it." He turned the volume up. A faint hum filled the tent. Low, continuous, hauntingly familiar. It was the same frequency recorded during Adrian Cole's last ascent. Larry closed her eyes. He's still down there. The hum deepened into rhythm. Instruments shuddered. The lights in the camp dimmed. On the infrared feed, one by one, the stars beneath the lake began to rise, slowly, gracefully, toward the surface, glowing brighter as they came. For a heartbeat, everyone in the tent forgot to breathe. Then the stars stopped, frozen mid-ascent, suspended like lanterns trapped in glass. The hum faded, and the sky above the valley darkened, unnaturally, completely, as though the daylight itself had been dimmed by something below the horizon. For the first time in recorded history, night fell from underneath. The lake glowed softly, vast and calm, a mirror of a cosmos no human had ever known. And in that stillness, the surface rippled once, like an exhale, before settling again into silence. On the thermal feed, faint letters shimmered through the heat bloom of the water. No one could explain how or why. Just one word, repeated 3 times, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "Return, return, return." The files were marked top secret // mirror tide / terminated, sealed under triple classification, and buried so deep within defense archives that even their existence was denied. They were declassified decades later under the pretext of environmental incident transparency. Most of the documents were unreadable. Entire pages blacked out, names erased, timestamps redacted. But a few fragments survived, transcripts, sonar logs, and one final entry dated July 29, 1953, exactly 72 years the day after the Douglas Skitran had vanished. The first surviving page contained the last recorded sonar transmission from the lake, labeled ping sequence 11A/echo closure. The transcript was short. Midnight, initiate ping. 17 seconds, return received, unknown source. 18 seconds, signal duplex detected vertical interference. 20 seconds, harmonic resonance reached. 21 seconds, source angle, 90 degrees. 22 seconds, transmission complete. A single note from the analyst followed. Return does not originate below. Source confirmed vertical. Signal inversion detected. Coordinates direct upward. Recommend immediate termination. The next pages detail the chaos that followed. All project sensors had synchronized spontaneously. their readings looping into perfect sine waves locked to a single frequency. The seismic array went silent. The magnetic field around the lake inverted polarity for 13 seconds, during which every compass on site pointed not north, but straight upward. Then the ping arrived. It was faint at first, a single, clean tone lasting exactly 12 seconds. It was unlike any previous sonar response. It carried no distortion, no delay, no echo. It came not from beneath the surface, but from above the array, directly overhead. At first, they thought it was interference, an atmospheric reflection. But when the analysts converted the signal to binary, the results froze them. It wasn't random noise. It was data, binary code, precise and deliberate. When translated, the numbers resolved into a coordinate set. Latitude and longitude values matched the lake exactly, but an altitude field that extended far beyond the atmosphere. 87 degrees 44 minutes 5 seconds north, 147 degrees 10 minutes 17 seconds west, alt, 1.014 AU, roughly the distance from Earth to the Sun. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone whispered, "It's not calling down, it's calling up." Further analysis showed something even stranger. The binary intervals matched the timing of the lake's heartbeat pulses, each bit aligned to the seismic rhythm like language structured through breath. The data wasn't random. It was deliberate synchronization. The report described vertical translation of origin, suggesting the signal's source wasn't underwater or even within Earth's crust. It was projecting upward, like a beacon pointing toward space. The analysts called it a directional echo, though none could explain how a sonar pulse, an underwater acoustic signal, could refract through atmosphere without losing coherence. But the next discovery silenced all speculation. When plotted in three-dimensional mapping software, the binary coordinates traced not a fixed point in space, but moving one, an orbit. The trajectory matched no known satellite, asteroid, or debris pattern. It circled Earth once every 23 hours and 56 minutes, synchronous with the planet's sidereal rotation, always directly above the lake. An artificial orbit, stationary not to the planet's equator, but to that exact patch of sky. The declassified memo labeled it simply, Artifact 3, location, above. After the final ping, all transmission ceased. The project was terminated that night under emergency order from Strategic Command. The base was dismantled within 72 hours. The lake, still glowing faintly under chill of fog, was declared a restricted geothermal anomaly zone. Yet one final paragraph survived the redactions, a handwritten note, and signed, written in graphite at the bottom of the report. The last signal wasn't a request. It was confirmation. The reflections complete. The sky above us opened. In the following weeks, amateur astronomers across Alaska began reporting a new star, barely visible to the naked eye, positioned directly above the valley. It pulsed faintly, rhythmically, every 45 seconds, the same interval as the lake's heartbeat. And though official agencies dismissed it as a transient satellite glint, declassified logs revealed something the public never saw. Infrared telescopes recorded the light not as emission, but as reflection. It wasn't shining outward. It was shining down, toward its twin buried in the lake below. Two mirrors, perfectly aligned, one beneath the water, one beyond the atmosphere, facing each other across the thin breadth of the world, locked in endless resonance. And between them, faint radio bursts continued to whisper across all frequencies. When decoded into binary, the message never changed. Altitude rising. No horizon. Reverse flight confirmed. Perfido. Enteo seguimos calm. Tom. Poetico cinematográfico melancólico y cósmico. Misturando belleza y terror silencioso. Estructura. Narrativa continua neofragmentada. Como último capítulo de Falego, uma travessia espiritual desfarcada de ficção científica. Final. Adrian esse fundeo reflexo, a fuseo neo e mort, mas transaceo, o humano dissolvendo esse no espelho do cosmos, dixando o leteo entre o extase e o espanto. A seguir esta verso completa ampliada, almost equals 40,000 characters, escrita no mesmo estilo das partes anteriores. Final chapter, the sky beneath. Years later, the road to the valley had almost vanished. Rain and time had swallowed it, turning asphalt into moss, steel into silence. The fences were gone, the warning signs bleached blank by weather. Only the air still remembered the hum. Faint, electric, coiled in the soil like a thought that refuses to die. Adrian Cole came alone. He hadn't spoken of the place in decades. The official story called him a consultant on environment recovery, but the truth was older and heavier. He had watched the project collapse, watched the reports buried, watched the lake erased from maps. Yet the call had never stopped. It came in dreams first, a soundless vibration that made his bones ache, a pulse felt rather than heard. Then came the light, flashes behind his eyelids at night, the color of water thinking about dawn. Now, old and thin, walking with a stick more out of habit than need, he stood at the ridge where control tents once stood. The valley was the same and not the same. The air clearer, the grass high in gold, the lake a sheet of perfect calm. He felt the pressure change before he even saw it, that soft, descending hush, as if the world were holding its breath again. He took off his hat, breathed in the cool morning, and descended the slope. No fences, no guards, no humming generators. Only wind and the steady ticking of his watch. Yet when he reached the water's edge, the watch stopped. He smiled faintly. Still punctual, he murmured. The surface was flawless. Not a ripple, not even reflection at first. Only depthless silver, like liquid mercury under thin sunlight. Then, slowly, his own face appeared, older, lined, pale. For a long time, he simply looked. He thought of Nadia, of the diver who had whispered its breathing, of the years lost trying to explain what no language could hold. He crouched, knees creaking, and reached toward the water. His reflection moved too, but half a beat late. He froze. The delay was small, delicate, the same stutter he had seen once before, long ago, when the lake first learned to look back. A whisper of wind passed. The reeds leaned. The reflection smiled. Not a grimace. Not mimicry. A soft, knowing smile, the kind given by someone who has waited a very long time. Adrian's breath caught. "I'm back," he said. His reflection's lips shaped the words before his own finished. The clouds above drifted east. The reflection's clouds drifted west. He felt it then. The hum, deep beneath the ribs, matching the old rhythm. 45 seconds between each pulse, the world inhaling through him. The surface shimmered. Light trembled through the water, like the first heartbeat after stillness. He leaned closer. "Show me." The lake obliged. The light came not from above, but from within. The color of dawn seen through bone, gold and violet interwoven. Beneath the surface, the star field stirred. Faint at first, then blossoming in slow spirals. Constellations no telescope had ever named unfurled beneath his feet, mirrored perfectly by the ordinary heavens overhead. Yet the ones below were brighter, younger, alive. He understood then what the scientists had never grasped. The mirror was never reflection, it was memory. The lake remembered sky, the way a wound remembers touch. He stepped forward. The water did not resist. It parted cleanly, accepting him ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then waist. The temperature matched the skin exactly. It felt less like entering water, and more like re-entering breath. He tilted his head back. Above him, the constellations began to drift. Not clouds, not stars. Movements too precise, too deliberate. The slow rotation of pattern seeking completion. Altitude rising, he whispered. The words of the old transmission. The stars answered. One by one, they shifted positions, forming circles around a blank center directly over the lake. The reflection below formed its twin. Two skies, rotating opposite ways, closing around him like eyelids. He thought of the column of water that had once risen here, of the silhouettes drifting upward like prayers. Perhaps they had never been lost, only translated. Perhaps Nadia was among them, watching from within the mirror. The water reached his chest. His heartbeat aligned with the pulse beneath. For the first time in years, the pain in his chest eased. Each beat of the unseen heart below echoed gently through his body, like two instruments tuning to the same note. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was no longer sure which side of the surface he stood on. The air shimmered. Gravity softened. The lake reflected him perfectly now, no delay. But when he blinked, his reflection didn't. It merely watched, eyes bright with starlight. He took another step, and the reflection took a breath. "Come back," it whispered, his own voice, but calm, ageless, freed of echo. He hesitated. The rational part of him, the scientist, the archaeologist, the man who once measured the world, wanted to step away, to study. But the part that followed the hum for decades knew this was no return. This was completion. The stars above began to move faster. The mirrored sky below matched perfectly. Light bent around the edges of the horizon until the two skies met in the middle, turning the world into a sphere of liquid night. In that enclosure of light, Adrian stood at the center, the single still point between reflection and origin. He raised his hand. His reflection did the same, perfectly synchronized now. The fingertips touched, glass meeting flesh, and the surface broke outward, not down. A ring of light spread from the contact, rippling across both worlds. Sound vanished. Weight vanished. Only light remained, soft, breathing, infinite. He felt himself unfold. He didn't drown. There was no cold, no panic. His lungs filled easily, each breath the texture of warm air after rain. The water held him upright, and for the first time since the world had learned his name, he felt no need to rise or sink. Around him, the star fields moved in patient spirals. The constellations he had once mapped now curved into letters, sentences, music. He understood none of it, yet all of it. The meaning was not linguistic, but emotional, a language of empathy, older than sound. He saw the figures then, the silhouettes he had glimpsed in the recordings years ago. They drifted through the star-filled depths like swimmers in a slow ballet, bodies luminous, skin woven of light and memory. When one passed near him, he recognized her. Nadia. She smiled, the same quiet smile his reflection had given, and reached for his hand. Her touch was warmth without weight. In her eyes, galaxies turned counterclockwise. He tried to speak, but his voice was unnecessary. The communication happened through pulse, heartbeat aligning, thought without distance. "You stayed," she said without words. I followed. She looked upward. Above them, through the liquid sky, the stars of the true night wheeled. Between those stars, something vast shimmered, a pattern like wings made of light, stretching across both heavens, folding them into one. "What is it?" he asked. The reflection finished. She replied, the world learning to see itself. From the shore, a single observer, a hiker who had ignored the no trespassing signs, watched in silence as the event unfolded. He would later describe it in his journal, never showing anyone. The old man walked into the lake. The water lit up around him, white, then gold. The sky above began to spin, stars sliding out of their constellations like fish from a net. When he reached the middle, the reflection rose to meet him. For a moment, there were two of him, one made of flesh, one of light. Then both were gone. The lake glowed until dawn. The clouds above glowed from below. When search teams came, they found no trace of Adrian Cole. Only his walking stick remained, half submerged in the sand, pointing not outward but inward, toward the center of the lake. The official report listed no anomaly detected. Privately, satellite imagery told another story. At 4:02, a brief spike in infrared radiation registered directly above the valley. The heat signature resembled an ascending column, narrow, vertical, and incredibly tall, disappearing into the upper atmosphere within seconds. At the same time, ground sensors recorded a soft harmonic pulse identical to the long-buried heartbeat frequency. After that, everything went quiet again. The next morning, the lake looked ordinary. Tourists came in summer, unaware of what had once happened there. Fishermen cast lines and found nothing. The water always reflected perfectly, too perfectly, like polished metal. No one could photograph it. Every image came back blank, as if the lake refused to exist on film. Yet those who stayed past sunset noticed something strange. When the first stars appeared, their reflections were brighter than the real ones, pulsing faintly in pairs. Sometimes, if the night was still, the water seemed to breathe, and if you listened closely, very closely, you could hear a faint rhythm beneath the waves, like the world's own heartbeat, counting not seconds but memory. Far above, in orbit no satellite ever charted, another reflection hung suspended, a point of light invisible to telescopes, circling the planet once every sidereal day. It mirrored the lake below perfectly. When the earth turned, it turned with it. When the water glowed, it answered with invisible radiance. Inside that reflection, time behaved differently. There was no up, no down, no horizon. There was only the slow dance of stars folding inward. The echo of breathing spread across eternity. And among those lights, two human figures drifted together, their outlines faint, their hearts synchronized to the rhythm of the planet's pulse. Adrian looked upward or downward, direction meaningless now, and saw himself mirrored in infinite succession, each version smiling slightly more, until expression itself became light. Nadia floated beside him, her hand finding his again. What happens now? He thought. Her answer came as warmth through the surrounding dark. Now the reflection watches the world that made it. He turned. Beneath them or above, earth glowed, oceans flashing like veins of light under skin. The lake was a tiny spark at the center of Alaska's shadow, pulsing every 45 seconds, each pulse echoing through the void like breath between two worlds. We were the experiment all along, he realized. The mirror was never built to show the sky. It was built to teach it. The thought made him laugh, softly, and his voice scattered into fragments of light, drifting through the star fields like pollen. On Earth, years passed. The lake remained quiet, though every so often, during certain alignments of moon and sun, the stars above it would shift again, rotating counterclockwise for a few minutes before returning to their normal paths. Astronomers called it atmospheric lensing. Locals called it the breathing night. Children played by its edge, tossing stones that never made a splash. Old men swore they saw faces under water, calm, watching, unafraid. Scientists from distant universities measured electromagnetic interference and left puzzled, their instruments behaving as though gravity bent differently near the shore. And once, during a total eclipse, when the valley plunged into sudden shadow, the lake lit up from within, revealing once more the buried constellations of the second sky, a map written in light beneath the surface. For 2 minutes, the world above and the world below looked identical, a perfect sphere of reflection. Then darkness lifted. The glow faded. Silence returned. But somewhere far beyond the reach of telescopes, a new point of light had appeared in the night. Faint, steady, pulsing every 45 seconds. Not a satellite, not a comet. Its motion was synchronous with Earth's rotation, always above that single valley. It pulsed once for every heartbeat the lake gave back. In time, people forgot the details. The military base became legend, the files myth, the story diluted into whispers of the lake that reflects wrong. Hikers went missing occasionally. Fishermen spoke of hearing music beneath the water when the air was still. Nobody believed them, not really. Yet on rare nights, when wind dies and clouds part, the sky over the valley behaves differently. The stars don't twinkle, they breathe, they drift ever so slightly counterclockwise, as if aligning some hidden geometry. And if you happen to be standing at the water's edge during one of those nights, you might notice something else, a figure standing across the lake, identical to you in every detail, watching patiently. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it raises its hand, waiting for you to mirror it. And if you do, if your fingertips meet that reflections on a cold, perfect surface, you may feel warmth instead of chill. You may hear a heartbeat echoing yours. You may see, for just an instant, another sky unfolding beneath your feet, a sky that is a reflection, but invitation. Above, the constellations begin to move again, realigning themselves into patterns no chart can name. The rhythm returns, slow, deliberate, eternal, 45 seconds apart. The world inhaling, the mirror exhaling, breath answering breath. Somewhere inside that pulse, Adrian Cole smiles, no longer within time or place, but part of the resonance that connects both. He is a reflection now, and the reflection is the world learning to remember itself. The stars turn once more, counterclockwise, and for a heartbeat, only a heartbeat, the sky and the lake trade places. Then everything is still, and